You're listening to a Soul One podcast. Happy Holy Week, Father.
Happy Holy Week to you as well. Here we are.
Here we are. This is sort of our last week of subbing in for Mike, but that's actually a lie because next week we'll be airing a pre-recorded episode with Nicole that was supposed to go out several weeks ago, and then we had a little bit of a fumble. So just a word of warning, during next week, Nicole and I will be referring to pre-Oscar conversation because it was supposed to come out the week before the Oscars. But you'll still get some movie reviews in there. But today we're going to be talking a movie that's kind of about Holy Week, but not really. Essentially, I asked you to come on for our Easter episode, and you picked the movie.
I did. And folks, okay, I'm going to say right now, trust me, I'm going to ask you to go with me on this one. This is going to be a very different kind of movie from the ones that you've had from me. If you think back, I think the first time I was on, it was things like Tremors, and since then we've had Fright Night, and we've had Deep Red, and Don't Look Now, and so, but I don't want you to think I'm some kind of like clerical Eli Roth or something like that. So I'm going to ask you to trust me on this one. The movie that I picked, and I did pick it really because, in fact, it's this kind of we're at the end of Lent. I'm going to trust you, kind of like go with me on this one. Go with me. We're at the end of Lent. We're in Holy Week, and the movie that I picked is Diary of a Country Priest, Robert Bresson. Very significant movie. I like to kind of pick out ones that I think, might be stretching you just a little bit. And this one's stretching in a very different direction.
Necessary for our film education.
This is a kind of film education one. At the very least, trust me on this one. It's one that's worth worth watching. Robert Bresson. And it's a very different pace. It's not horror at all. Very restrained style.
Drama.
It's a drama, but also, well, it's drama, but not drama, because it's an undramatic drama. The style is actually kind of like Bresson had this very kind of like restrained style.
Day in the life.
He did not want people to be watching this movie and carried along by the emotive acting of his leads. And so, in fact, everything is very restrained. Maybe it appeals to me as a kind of... So I'm from Britain, we don't do emotion, thank you very much. So it's got a very kind of low-key, nobody's kind of yelling or whatever.
Is that... just to interject real quick, I don't know a lot, to be quite honest. I don't watch French film. I don't even think I've watched a lot of French New Wave.
Right.
Do the French have a reputation of being restrained?
Bresson certainly did. So but there's also this. I think there's a movement that kind of takes place here with him that he's a part of, and it's a bigger kind of thing. If you're watching Ingmar Bergman's movies, you can see how Ingmar Bergman actually kind of he refers to this actually as a movie that was hugely influential on him. The movie he talks about that is kind of the movie called Winter Light. Which is about a kind of Lutheran pastor in Sweden, and he connects it to this. So yes, Diary of a Country Priest, folks. It's about a priest. This is Father Quirk. I'm going to ask you just to trust me on this one.
This is our first quote unquote Catholic movie.
I know, and it's actually considered one of the great Catholic movies. Right. Bresson was a practicing Catholic, but was also a great auteur, really, in terms of his kind of like as a kind of leading light in the 1950s and kind of that kind of like new movement in cinema. Right. So that's where he's kind of Tarkovsky kind of speaks about the impact of Bresson on his kind of on his filmmaking. So what you've got here is actually Diary of a Country Priest. very accurate, very true to the source, Georges Bernanos's Diary of a Country Priest.
Fiction or a memoir?
Fiction.
Okay.
Fiction, and it's based. It's a diary. It's written as kind of diary entries of this frail man, this priest who feels he's a failure.
Bit of a sad sack.
He is, I suppose.
Or at least that's what the villagers think about him.
They certainly do think that about him. And so he's a failure. I mean, and this man, that's why I think it kind of fits with the theme of Holy Week. This is a kind of the week going towards, I thought, well, we'll do, given that it's coming out this week, we'll go with a kind of Good Friday, if you like, kind of thing. This man feels he's a failure, but then actually there's that kind of wonderful moment at the end, all is grace. Mm-hmm. What does it matter? All is grace. And so it's very kind of powerful, kind of like punctuating the kind of like the sense of failure and darkness, if you like. But he's not making an impact on his parishioners. They all can't stand him.
They hate him.
They hate him. They do. They kind of get out of here. leave, go away, go away. And he, the cure of Torcy, the nearby parish. He thinks he's just kind of like such a loser in some ways. Great, very affectionate towards the priest here, but
his mentor, I guess you could say.
That's right, kind of a mentor, but also thinks he's soft, thinks he's not. He's taken in by these folks. If you remember, there's someone who wants to have the funeral for his wife, and he's like going, I'm not paying 1 cent, 1 sou more. I'm not. That's what you're getting. You're getting this, and that's it. And the cure of Torcy basically says, I'd have kicked him out. I'd have shut him the door. This is the guy's funeral. He's haggling over the price of his wife's funeral. And the cure of Torcy basically is like, I would show him the door. And he's got money anyway.
Yeah, I thought, well, it's good to know that our lived experience of the church has not differed that greatly since the 1950s. Yeah. But, he said, I think he even says, we used to overeat, and now all of you look like starved cats coming out of seminary. So there's this kind of I don't think it's like an overt commentary on masculinity, but there certainly is this idea of sort of like a feminized spirituality. Right. And he is, because he's sickly, like he physically has something wrong with him, that is an interesting dynamic in the movie, that he is taken with the men in the movie in the sense that they're healthy or they're more dominant than he is, because certainly the other priest and the doctor, but even the count, he's like, oh, I've gotten a friend in the count, and then like next scene he totally messes it up.
I know, and the count is very kind of masculine, isn't he, as a character? As a kind of like hard-faced man, though, and of course he's having the affair, and so but the priest seems incapable of making a difference with him. So he's drawn to these figures, but at the same time, but he's also kind of drawn. Serafina, for instance, as well. She also displays masculine. Oh my goodness, yes.
Because she's a bit of a bruiser. So
hard-faced little girl. Actually, oh my goodness, and just
saves him at one point.
That's right. She does, but is again very kind of dominant. So he's quite a kind of passive figure. Lacks confidence. Sees himself as a failure.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of part of this theme, I think, in there, is that he sees himself as a failure. Mm-hmm. He's aware of the opposition. But at the same time, he has that kind of breakthrough moment with the Countess as well.
Yeah.
Where he's able, in a sense, to get through to her, and that there's this kind of moment of transformation before her death, where in fact she goes from being hard and withdrawn and
resigned.
Yeah, resigned, but kind of is moved into a kind of, in a sense, of the effect of grace, if you like, in there.
I'm just going to pause real quick because to ask you a question. So I find this a lot with movies that were made like pre-60, because I do think we see a marked change in how movies are made in the 60s. So when I watch movies pre-60s, I find that a lot of the dialogue is subtext.
Right.
They don't always... And I don't think this is a foreign language movie, because even sometimes you watch like an old Hitchcock movie, and sometimes I come out of a scene being like, what just happened?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I guess where I struggled the most with this movie was I felt like so much of it was subtext. Like it wasn't so you don't... They never explicitly say that the Count is having an affair. Right. You only kind of draw that out. And I guess also...
Yeah, when the daughter says, you know, like, they didn't even close the curtains.
But you don't get that until after, I think. Like, and I guess part of it is this movie is episodic in the sense that each scene is essentially... an episode from his diary.
That's right.
So you're kind of putting things together.
And his voiceover. So you're getting his voiceover of the scene as well as the very spare interactions, though, between characters.
Yeah.
A lot of it, you're seeing them. You know, like it starts with the kind of the you know, there's the priest with his bicycle, and he looks back towards the chateau, and there's the Count with the
that's that I didn't even and they're
so
kind of
see them at the
embraced
and they're embraced, and then there's like a kind of a moment of embarrassment that the cure has seen them, and so they make their way back, but
I guess
you don't know at the beginning that that's who she is,
right?
And so you get this there is a kind of very kind of, it's almost kind of flat, kind of very slow unfolding, and you're expected in a sense to kind of do a lot of work. So what I would say is there's a great deal of trust in you as the viewer of the movie. Trust that you are going to do some of the work of
and reading between the lines. So my question, so before we get back into that, my question was for you was a plot point, and I meant to read the synopsis and then I forgot. So part of this like struggle he's having with the Countess is that so the pause now if you don't want any spoilers, and then come back to leave, because I am going to ask about plot points. So the daughter approaches him to intervene regarding this affair.
Right.
And then so his idea of intervening is to then confront the wife.
No, he goes to confront the Count, and if you remember...
But he's not there.
The Count closes... You see the door closed.
Right.
He's not going to be received by the Count.
Right.
And so, in fact, he goes in to see the Countess.
Right. Kind of as an afterthought.
That's right. And so you end up with...
but my question is I didn't quite... Again, because it wasn't explicitly stated in the film. Was the idea that the daughter was going to run away... And so he's trying
to commit suicide.
Oh, okay.
So he knows in that kind of moment. Again, it's one of these things. Is she going to leave, or what? But he says, you know, the note. He says, "Give me the letter. The letter that's in your pocket."
Her suicide letter.
Her suicide
and
note.
So essentially, he's saying, he's essentially calling the mom out for cowardice, saying, "You've been so tied up in your own grief, you're going to lose another." Child. Right. And she's like, I don't care.
Yeah, who cares about her? I know.
That's where some of that stuff was hard.
God has already taken away one of my children. Why would I? And so you end up with this. Yeah, that's a kind of that's where he has that interaction with her out of this kind of moment of crisis. And yes, she is initially unmoved. And he really challenges her on that in fact her hardness actually kind of means that her dead child is she's further away from her dead child than she would be if in fact she would open up her heart. Right. So in fact that hardness of heart actually kind of cuts her off not only from her family, a living family if you like, but also from her dead child too.
Right.
And I think that's quite there's a kind of, again, it's a lot of this, the idea, I mean, it is a kind of very kind of spiritually thought-provoking book. I think, hopefully from a very human book. I do hope, you don't have to kind of share
and movie adaptation.
An adaptation, yeah. I hope you don't have to share our kind of like theological kind of
convictions
to hopefully kind of see that the movie itself, really invites kind of reflection on the human condition as well.
Right.
About what it is to kind of feel like you're a failure and to kind of, you're not making a difference but actually that we can make a difference. There can be these moments of grace, if you're like, the glimmers, that's right, and the importance of not shutting ourselves off from other people.
Right.
Closing the door on others and what we might miss if we do that, and that we can become hard as human beings. So I think there is it's a very kind of human movie as well in that way. But that's, so yes, it trusts you though as a kind of, again, I don't think we do it very well today. I think we tend to, in movies, we want the director or whatever, we want them to tell us what's going on now.
Yes.
Don't leave anything that we might have to kind of read between the lines here. Oh, that'd be too much. I think we got used to being spoon-fed the plot.
Yeah.
And spoon-fed.
And everything's explained.
That's right. And just make sure there's an explosion somewhere in there, because if there isn't an explosion, I'm probably going to fall asleep.
There was, did you see these headlines? I didn't watch the interview. I think it was the same interview that Timothée Chalamet got in trouble for the ballet stuff. Right. And he's talking with the True Detective actor.
All right, yes,
Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey says that now with streaming services, filmmakers and actors are pressured to essentially move Act 3 into Act 1, or right. I'm kind of summarizing poorly, but essentially we skip all of the second act because everyone's attention span is so short that if you don't know what's going to happen in the first 20 minutes of the movie, you're going to turn it off. This is not that kind of movie.
No, well, this is not that kind of movie because nothing happens. Well,
the end, you're waiting to find out what's wrong with him, kind of, in a way.
It's not an exciting movie in that way. I mean, I was struck rewatching it again, and I've seen this movie various times over the years. Rewatching it, and he said there's a moment where I thought, wow, this would be almost funny if in fact it were done on purpose. But it is on purpose, but it's not intentionally funny. Which is when he says about the doctor commits suicide. And the curé says about the curé of Tours, he goes, he was visibly moved. And seeing this guy in his car, I'm not sure I could have told the difference between him from the previous scene and this scene. Although there is a kind of slight tremor in the voice, and I watched the face quite closely, and I thought, actually, but there's a deliberate, as I say, a kind of Bresson does not want his actors to be over the top. This
right,
is not,
like the theater acting that we were used to in maybe the 30s and 40s of film.
He's wanting it to be very kind of low key,
right,
flat almost,
more than naturalistic.
That's right. Because it's unnatural, in fact, the way that everyone is so flat in some sense.
Yeah,
but it's a deliberate style, which is about, they become, in a sense, the kind of the canvas on which we as the viewer are reflecting
and projecting,
and that's it, and kind of like trying again. So it's and like a lot of those scenes, like the scenes, how many times, I was really aware of it this time actually, how many times do you see hands, like just shots of hands, like no faces or anything like that. There are things like that where you see, or the angles are quite unusual as well, so that the face is not as important in the scene actually as what's actually happening in the foreground, So I thought, it's very interesting the way that he kind of makes the film. He sets up shots, again, to kind of almost distract you from the face, so you're not always focusing on the face. Although there are moments where, in fact, the face, especially the Ledoux face, the lead actor, you know, like you see his face, you know, and you, in a sense, we're kind of invited to really kind of gaze upon him, in his, but again, he's fairly emotionless at some level, even though in fact the language, of the diary entries, the voiceover, is often actually very emotionally charged, like what he's saying and what he's writing on the page.
To me, he felt frantic, and it like increases. But again, maybe that's me projecting my experience onto the film, right?
Right.
But he certainly, especially as you see him getting increasingly sick,
Right.
and how the community is misreading that whole alcoholism subplot. I was a little bit.
I know you're drinking too much, and he's always going. But he's all he can get down is kind of like
because of
wine
his
soaked bread.
Yeah,
you know that's.
But so I felt like, to me, it was a very tense watching experience,
right.
because at least, you know, you could argue that he's an unreliable narrator, but in this movie, I don't think they're setting him up for that. I think you take it at face value. So I'm like, he's not an alcoholic. He's sick. And then everyone in the community is turning against him.
Right.
And essentially they're going to use this incident to push him out of the community.
Right.
And so even though you say nothing happens, for me, like that like sparse plot is what's driving the movie, right? And so, it was I would not say it was for me. I think a good way to explain it for me, my point of view, it was not a passive movie experience.
Right.
You know, you have
it
to do a little.
It isn't passive.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say. I mean, you can't. If you were going to go into this and kind of go, "This is my popcorn movie choice for the night."
Yeah.
I mean, oh my goodness, like, But you know, the popcorn movie that doesn't ask anything of you. It just basically gives you a lot of
entertainment.
So it's not entertainment. No, this invites reflection. It invites a kind of close reading, because you have to pay attention. That's where, in fact, all these scenes where, in fact, there's there's little kind of interaction between the characters. A lot of them are monologues in one way or another. You've got the voiceover. You've got these scenes where not a lot happens in the scene. You know that. Is it Seraphine, when she kind of throws down her bag at his feet, and he takes it to the parent, to the farm, and the mother kind of grabs it from him and then shoves Seraphine inside, and then the door closes, and you get this kind of sense of, he's trying to make a connection. He's trying to be involved there, and they're just not interested.
Right.
And it's kind of, it invites a kind of reflection on, what is it to be, as I say, a sense of failure, a sense of a lack of connection. Even if you're getting this kind of rich inner monologue with him. This is clearly a man who kind of feels. Yeah. And feels, even if in fact you're not seeing it on his face, you're not seeing it in terms of the way that, in fact, the way the scenes are set up. He's very kind of, he feels strongly. High-minded, yeah. But emotionally as well. Like there's a kind of rich interior emotional life that isn't actually, he's not getting to express.
And isn't welcomed by the community. They don't want it.
They don't want it.
It's interesting because we see the movie 100% from his point of view. So like you mentioned, the door closes, and whereas maybe a different movie or a modern movie, we would continue to see the action behind the closed door. You'd find out why the mother is so mad at the daughter. In this movie, because it's from his point of view, his diary, he doesn't know what happens.
He doesn't know what
behind.
happens, no.
And there is a line, I don't know if it's the Count or the other priest, essentially saying, the other priests were well liked. Like the other priests didn't. So we don't know.
Well, they weren't well liked. If you remember, they commanded respect. Right. They got on.
They laid down the law.
Because, in fact, they were tough men.
Yeah, tyrants.
That's and he's, as you say, almost kind of feminine in terms of his kind of. He's presented as kind of wanting to have that kind of connection with
He's
people,
more,
rather than to
he's
be-
meek and gentle, whereas...
Yeah, and, you know, the cure, he's old school.
Yeah.
And so is the canon as well. If you remember the uncle, the Countess's uncle, who and he's also quite kind of old school as well. So that's where you've got this older generation and these younger ones. 'Cause if you remember his friend at the end, who also kind of dropped out.
The intellectual.
Yeah, but he's also ill, and he's not kind of he didn't. I mean, he talked about kind of being. He felt he walked away because he was ill,
and then ends up compromising his vows.
Right. That's right. So he's now kind of living with a woman, and he's no longer. And he actually says, I can't kind of. He asks for absolution at the end. He says, well, I don't think I should be doing that.
Yeah.
And then what does it matter? All is grace.
Yeah.
So you've got this kind of moment there that kind of punctuates the kind of sense of failure there.
Yeah.
With this man.
Is this like a... Because it's interesting, there is this commentary about, you know, the younger generation isn't, like, tough. And, you know, this is made in almost the immediate post-war period.
Right.
Do you think the film director was interested in those themes? Or do you think it was just, like, the air people were breathing? That, like, to us, I think if you were to look at this from a modern lens, even though, again, it's not explicit to me, that's the things that was what I took away most from the movie, was this old way of doing things, and how the younger generation, because the only two young priests we see, one is no longer living his vows and the other one
is dying. Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's just, maybe I'm reading like too much film analysis.
So it is a very faithful adaptation of the novel.
And did the book come out in the 40s?
I'm trying to remember when the book came out, actually.
Because the movie's 51.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't remember when Benanos wrote it, but it... so I wouldn't want to kind of say when it was, but it is kind of like... I think, actually, it might be a little bit of a reflection on a sense, the changing mores of society.
Right.
Well. But to be honest, I think more importantly, again, some of those kind of universal themes are certainly kind of critical, but also the notion that the kind of the French countryside, they're hard.
Right.
They're not particularly. They're not particularly.
They're in conflict with sort of this intelligentsia, like the city intelligentsia.
Yeah. So the truculent peasants, if you like. I think you've got a little bit of that going on. You know that. These are hard people.
Don't bring your book learning lives. Here.
Yeah, and that life isn't easy, and they've got kind of hard faced. They've got kind of tough in the process, and that's where like the priest needs to be tough as well.
Right.
Like almost, if you want to be a kind of a country priest, then you need to be tough like the people are tough.
Right.
And but there's also a kind of sense it grinds you down as well. Like that's what the Curé of Torcy kind of says, doesn't he? In terms of the doctor had lost his faith.
Right.
He'd lost hope, and that's why he kind of, I think, do you think he killed himself? Is the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it a hunting accident or was it intentional?
But the Curé, his friend, is in no doubt about the fact that it was an act of suicide. And that he'd been worn down, that he lost all the young doctors, if you remember, had encouraged his
retirement.
His patients
right.
to go to not go to him because he was not up to date.
Right.
He didn't know about antibiotics, and so don't go to him. And the only ones he was left with were the ones who couldn't pay.
Right.
They were the only ones who would still come to him, and that he lost hope in a sense. So it's not just the kind of the priests that are having a hard time. I mean, like there's as I say, the doctor there
right.
as a kind of finding himself out of step with where things are, and the young. But interestingly, the young priests are kind of like soft, and the old the young doctors are kind of the hard nosed ones, and it's the old doctor who, in fact, is in a sense left patientless and lost hope. So it's so there are kind of these things kind of going on in there. Anyway, that's I think, as I say, I think there's a kind of reflection on the kind of human spirit in here, I think, as well as the kind of theological questions. So, but what it is, I know I keep coming back to this, but I think that's where there's a kind of bravery about the young priest as well, the country priest, in all of this. And that he does just keep on trying, even though he feels he's an utter failure.
Even in prayer, he's faithful.
That's right. He can't pray, he says, what is it? There's the thing where he says, I can't pray. And he goes, prayer is almost like kind of the breath in my lungs or whatever, but I can't pray, so he feels like he can't breathe almost without it. But he keeps on, even though in fact he feels like he's a failure, and he feels like he can't kind of pray, and he can't connect with people.
Here's a question.
He's rejected by them. He still keeps on trying. He still keeps on
persevering. And even, that the interactions he has with, like, I guess you could say the mistress, or like, the common law partner of his friend.
Yes.
But I think the French would have said maybe mistress, but he's still being with her in that moment, what we would say pastorally, even though he's dying. Yes. Again, there's a real faithfulness and that was the other thing I was struck by. People hated his simplicity.
That's right.
That, like, what, his like childlike faith? Is that what was annoying people?
I think there is a little bit of that. The fact that he's
a true believer.
He's and innocent as well.
And wants people to be better.
Innocence, and that's right. He wants people to be better. He wants to, but he can never quite challenge them and connect with them, in a way that kind of make them change. There's the scene, like the count. He can't get the count to think. Write
the check for the boys' club.
That's it. So he's always kind of failing to do what he wants, but he wants them to be better, but he does just keep on trying and failing, but trying and fail. But again, it's so that there's something about, is it important to try? Is the attempt important in itself? Whether you succeed or not, is there value in the attempt?
Right.
To do the right thing, to be the better version of yourself, if you like. I think, these are questions, certainly from a Catholic point of view, folks. Hey, sorry,
guilty.
There you go. That's it. Is what's more important? Is it the kind of the practice of virtue, if you like, the way that you act? Is it better to act in the correct way, even if in fact the result is not success?
Right.
Then, or does the outcome justify the means, if you like? Is it the consequence that matters most at the end of the day? And that's a big kind of moral question. And in this, I think you get a very definite. Actually, it's not the success that matters. It's the way that he lives. If you like. The doing. The
trying again.
Trying again, but also just trying even failure. Even in the face of failure, just keep on trying to be the right. To be a good priest, to be a priest to these people who hate him, want rid of him. Slip him notes saying, "Get out, go," and they're trying to get rid of him.
Here's a question for you. So I agree with you that what you're describing is a universal theme. I don't think you necessarily have to be a person of any faith to kind of grapple with these moral questions. However, if you're watching this from a faith-based perspective, we know that the ending is a happy ending.
Right.
So I guess my question is, and it's hard because, like, this is the air we breathe. So, like, it's hard to, like, turn that part of our brain off. But do you think a modern audience that is divorced from any sort of like spirituality or faith. So like we know that last sentence, it's like it's Aquinas, all is straw. Yeah. Is essentially what he's saying at the end, but all is grace.
All is grace. That's right.
Right? Yeah. Like so say you're a secular 30-year-old who didn't have, do you think they would be able to see that actually that's a hopeful ending?
Right.
Or are they going to take away that, oh, it's not worth...
Well, I hope that, look, hopefully people are broad-minded in terms of, whatever their convictions are. I try to kind of approach things that I disagree, I'll disagree with. And hopefully kind of like will take up the challenge, if you like, and see whether, to grapple with. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it. So hopefully there's a kind of the willingness to engage with even something that you might disagree with.
Right.
So if you kind of take a kind of largely consequentialist view, that you can actually kind of see, though, that there's something quite powerful in this. There's a kind of powerful message, which might be a counter message to what you kind of what you believe, but can still kind of see, okay, well, maybe that's worth engaging with, taking on. So that I think that. Yeah.
I guess my question goes even further in the sense that if you don't have, I don't know, we might have been having this conversation just like in work recently. I don't think we talked about this on our recent episode, but there's this idea that if you were watching a movie in the 1950s, even if you were an atheist, because that was the dominant worldview, things like grace and sin,
right,
and like the kingdom of God, like even if you didn't believe it, you would understand those touchstones, and so you could engage with the source material. I guess my question is,
right,
do you think there's enough, like, if you have no frame of reference, like you have not, because that's, I remember working with undergraduate students who had lost those kind of cultural touchstones for certain things in film. So I forget what film it was, but it was the 7 Deadly Sins in the movie. And so you had to explain to the kids watching it, this is the 7 deadly sins, because they just had no. So I guess that's my question. These themes are universal, but it's told through a distinctly Catholic lens. So I don't know if, that's my question. Do you think, and it's hard for me because, again, it's the air we breathe, so I can't turn my brain off to know whether or not.
Well, folks out there,
let us know.
Let us know for sure. I hope, again, yes, that's difficult to kind of, because for me, this is, as you say, it's the air that we breathe. We certainly kind of know one of the great biblical movies is, the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which is Pier Paolo Pasolini, gay, communist, atheist, kind of asked by John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd of blessed memory, asked by John the 23rd to make a movie about the Gospels, and he chooses Gospel of Matthew and just plays it straight. Jesus walks on water and stuff like that, and complete. But again, maybe because in fact he had grown up in a world where in the kind of the Catholic Italy, that in fact it was something he could engage with and kind of like just play straight. Yeah. Even though in fact it's not who he was.
Or his life, his worldview, right?
His worldview, but it's a worldview that he could still inhabit because of his background.
Yeah.
And maybe there is a kind of difference that comes with 70 years, I would hope not. I would say certainly, given that the importance of this movie, that there cinematically. So to kind of just come back to kind of the technical questions, kind of step back from the storytelling, if you like,
and themes. The themes,
yeah. The way that it's told and the way that so the kind of the way that it's filmed, the way that it's just structured, people, it's had an impact. And it's kind of one of the big movies of this kind of the kind of turn, if you like, that we see kind of in the next, in people like Ingmar Bergman and folks like that, they're downstream from him, and you can see the impact. And so there are certainly things that people can still connect with.
Right. Even if they don't have, they will have the visual vocabulary, even if they don't have like the thematic vocabulary.
And maybe the instinctual kind of sense of what you're seeing as well. I think, because, again, in some ways it could be, I mean, I don't think you could say, make a movie and it's about the postman in the village or whatever, and have the same questions. I don't think so, but I also think this is not a particularly his priesthood doesn't play a huge kind of role in the kind of the front of your mind. You're not seeing long scenes of him you see him celebrating mass, but you don't see a lot of celebrating mass. Yeah. Or you don't hear him, he tries to get her to go in the confessional at one point, and things like that. But you're not seeing a lot of that. That's the daughter, by the way, getting her to go in the confessional because of something she wants to say.
He's trying to get her to confess, and she doesn't have anything. She doesn't want to.
She doesn't want to, and he thinks she needs to. But there. So I think in some ways, it couldn't not be about a priest, but at the same time, his priesthood is maybe not front and center.
I guess you're right. It wouldn't be about the postman, but you could swap out him being the priest for a teacher. A young teacher from the city being tasked to teach a bunch of country folk.
Yeah, or was it Sidney Poitier or whatever? As the kind of the West Indian.
To Sir with Love.
Yeah.
Great movie, by the way.
A wonderful movie. Wonderful movie.
Because it's fish out of water.
Fish out of water, that's right.
And class.
Class, race. There's all kinds of things going on there. And about the inability to connect. And it's interesting that, that's only, a decade later or whatever that you get movies like that. So in a sense, maybe you could see it, and maybe that's a part of the way that it could work.
Right.
But I think, anyway, I hope that the vocabulary is universal enough that people can get it. But I think for me, it's easy to kind of watch it and kind of really kind of engage. Partly because of the collar, folks. But I think also, as you say, because it's the air that we breathe. It's the kind of, we have these kind of theological convictions that this movie is kind of laid over, because Bernanos was a very kind of Catholic writer as well. So,
because I watched this movie as so much of, because again, I'm watching this, and he seems to me spiritually convicted.
Right.
And he's trying to inhabit a world that is not interested in spirituality. Forget theology. They're not interested. No. And so I watched it from that point of view, right? Whereas you're looking, you watched it from, or what you're talking about now at least, is more those transcendental, what's the word? Transcendent human themes, less the spirituality and more just, the perseverance of character.
So I watch all of these things. I'm
on multiple levels. I know.
Part of what I'm trying to do here is kind of like try to sell the movie to you guys out there and say, this is worth, and not,
it is a worthy movie.
Some kind of proselytizing kind of like, I'll see you all at mass on Sunday kind of way. I'm not wanting to do, of course, I mean, from my perspective, that would be wonderful. But I also want to kind of say that, I think that there is value in this movie, even if you don't share those kind of theological convictions. And I want to kind of, I'm part of it, I'm maybe aiming at your audience a little bit.
Yeah.
Who might, some may be people of faith and some may not be.
Yeah.
And I still think even for people who don't have a kind of faith that they belong to, that there can be something in this movie that they can that we can kind of take from it that are kind of universal themes. Right. That the invitation to reflect on what it is to be human, the desire for contact.
Yeah.
To persevere in the face of kind of a sense of, you know, a failure, if you like, you know, that there is value in perseverance, in courage, in
the faithfulness of the
endurance.
quiet life. Did you end up watching Tree Dreams? Oh my goodness. Train Dreams. It was nominated for Best Picture this year.
No,
I reviewed this several weeks ago now. And so for our listeners, go watch this one, Diary of a Country Priest. But if you're looking for, I would say, similar content from a modern filmmaking perspective, Train Dreams, which is, there's like one or two church scenes, but it's not like a faith-based movie.
Right.
But it's this idea of the hidden life of a man, you know, and that quiet perseverance of a life that's unwatched in the sense, right? And how do you overcome tragedy? And no one cares if you overcome tragedy, but you have to persevere and live a good life, so to speak. So that would be a similar in terms of themes. And I talk about this movie as often as I can, A Hidden Life.
Yes.
Which is like overtly Catholic because it's based on the life of a blessed. But that same idea of, you know, how do you, when no one is looking, like you're saying, and you are presented with doing the quote unquote morally right thing, right? And so I think that these themes are, I guess I wasn't trying to push you really hard. It's just something that I'm interested in because we live in a post, like a post-Christian worldview. So movies, that's what I'm interested in kind of as a cultural historian. Movies had a vocabulary, you know, up into a certain point, and we've sort of lost a shared vocabulary by being in a post-Christian society. But that's not to say... so that's, I would be interested if our listeners would write in and say, can you, if you're a person of faith, you probably can engage with this movie, no problem. But if you have no faith or are a different faith tradition, can you still work through these themes? Just like I haven't talked to non-Christians about A Hidden Life. Like it was made by Terrence Malick, who I don't believe is...
But it's kind of certainly a kind of spiritually aware kind
his
of
movies
filmmaker.
are always...
So, you know, that's right. They're often kind of asking big questions, big philosophical questions. I don't know, you know, what his... But I know that, again, he plays it very straight in that movie as, you know, as you say, a kind of very Catholic movie because the subject matter is Catholic. And he takes it seriously. He doesn't kind of... You know, again, but it is a hidden life. What it reminds me of, you know, is George Eliot as well. And this maybe is where it captures some of that kind of universal, the universal kind of message, if you like, there, something for everyone. But again, George Eliot is coming in the mid-19th century with the kind of the shared vocabulary of a kind of Christian society, where the graves. The world is a better place, you know, for the small acts of the hidden life, you know, lived by those whose graves are no longer visited in a forgotten graveyard. You know, this notion that, you know, that the hidden life, the small acts can actually make the lives of everyone around them immeasurably better just through the small kindnesses and the small acts that they carry out, that there can be an outsized impact from that, and maybe that's that kind of sense of you know, that it's you know, the outcome is not always immediately obvious to the things that we do. Certainly, you know, you see. He has some small success, this kind of country priest. He has some small success in terms of, you know, kind of changing the countess, you know, the impact he has on her before she dies.
And he says to the other priest, you know, I have no guilt of what happened.
No. Like,
I did the right thing, or at least what's right to him, you know, based on his convictions. So there's that idea again, that like that faithfulness to our... to what we're called to do in that moment, right?
Yeah.
It was, I will say it was a difficult movie because difficult in the sense of, like I mentioned, it's not a passive movie. So it's asking you to do work that modern moviegoers are not asked to do.
That's right.
And, trying to piece together, in a sense, what the narrative, I guess you could say. Because it also, the way it's edited, it's very, like you said, the scenes, the interactions he has with people are very short. So it's like 1 minute scene, fade to black, and he always fade. I think it faded to black after each. Black
quite frequently in there. Each scene, it's almost like
the
turning of the page.
Yeah,
like a new diary.
Yeah,
now. And so the scene comes to an end. Mm-hmm. Yes, and they are vignettes. They are. So that's true. I think it is a very different pace. I'd be interested to know as well how much people are interested. How many people actually, know about French New Wave, and how many people watch French New Wave.
Right.
And I'd be interested to know about that. Martin Scorsese loves this movie, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he said that this was the movie that kind of stood behind him making Silence, for instance. It was this.
Another hugely Catholic movie.
I know. Hey,
guilty as charged, but also a very good movie.
If you have me on again, I promise I won't talk about the Catholic kind of stuff again.
But Silence is also But again, you're even though we can't speculate on people's faith life, but Martin Scorsese grew up as a American Italian, so like his upbringing would have been very Catholic, even if he wasn't practicing, and so he's interested in what we would consider, Catholic themes, but they're not exclusive to the Catholic faith.
No, well, that's where I think you can. Do I think you can get more from it? Maybe through that, is an easier way in, if you like, for kind of reflecting on it. It's not so much that you can get more from it, but it's easier if you've got your kind of one foot in the door. Already.
Yeah, the frame of reference.
I
don't think you need to be Catholic to watch Silence.
No, you wouldn't. No. I think, and I think, I don't. I just said I don't. I think again. I think most of the people, who, what is it? I think a lot of those folks where this has been a kind of an important kind of movie on, not necessarily practicing
any faith. Yeah.
So.
Do you think as a society, this will be my last question because we're running out of time and you might have other things you want to talk about. So do you think that we're not asking those questions as often in film now?
We not asking
the big questions.
The big questions? Well, Terrence Malick is the one who's the real kind of heavy hitter in that way. But he's kind of out there on his own, isn't he, today? In terms of kind of like big, maybe more in kind of in indie movies these days, where you'll have people asking questions. What was that one? What was that one with Ethan Hawke, where he was the minister or whatever, and who was wrapping barbed wire around his chest?
I forget the name of it. That came out.
He was going to drink kind of like the was it bleach or whatever at one point as well. I mean, there's all kinds of things where you've got this very kind of grim movie in some ways. I don't know if we do ask big movies as much, big questions in movies these days.
Big questions, but also maintaining, because I think Terrence Malick does this, and Train Dreams, which was heavily influenced by Terrence Malick, does this, in that it's still hopeful. That idea that, like, you're asking these big questions and that even though life is absurd and horrible things happen and tragedy happens, life is still worth living.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in that. Same with, I think, Diary of a Country Priest is saying that life is still worth living.
Oh, yeah.
Even in, like, the hard things. And I don't know, because, I don't think Marvel movies are necessarily... people are going to...
Mike, I didn't say that, Mike. Just to be
I'll be the one to die on that sword for you. But, yeah, I just don't know in terms of...
I think, to what extent is it a product of the parlous state movie finances these
Right.
days. That can you imagine someone pouring money into making a kind of big budget kind of movie like this? If you were to make a big budget version of something like
Right.
this today, who wasn't already established like Terrence Malick.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen.
And my guess is, in fact, that studios are willing to kind of have Terrence Malick make a movie like this because, in fact, it's something that, in a sense, it's not going to be a money spinner. You don't make a movie.
It's their
about kind of
prestige
like
movie for the year.
You know, an Austrian Catholic farmer who's a conscientious objector in kind of, you know, under the Nazis. You don't make a movie like that, you know, and expect that, my goodness, we're going to be hitting this one out of the park in terms of our box office. No, you make it because, in fact, you think it's worth making.
Yeah.
But only Terrence Malick. Is there anyone who's got the kind of name to do that? You know, again, Martin Scorsese could do it. You
right.
know, like, and Silence, to a certain extent, is one of those kind of movies. Even though, in fact, there's a little bit of a kind of action to it. It's not as actionless as, say, A Hidden Life or Diary of a Country Priest. So I don't know that we have. I think it could be just the state of the kind of the studio system today, that the only places where movies are asking big questions like this are in the kind of the indie scene, if you like. Independent movies are the only place where it's happening.
I think we talked about this. I could be, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I saw a scathing critique of Rogers Eggers, the witch, and how he's actually a Christian filmmaker, and they said it like in disgust, right? But the horror genre is again a genre where you can comfortably kind of explore ideas of goodness and evil and perseverance and stuff without being overtly,
Yeah, and look, if you think back to what I'd had Dracula, Hammer House of Horror, Hammer's Dracula there, and how in fact it takes seriously, the power of the cross in the kind of movie. Horror is the kind of place where, in fact, evil is taken seriously. The Exorcist, is a kind of movie where, in fact, you've got, like it's the Catholic Church that's kind of like taking on the demon in a sense, and it's the only one that seems to actually have the kind of the wherewithal to do it. The ending of that movie is kind of problematic, but anyway, that's fine. But it's it is a place where, in fact, people are willing to ask those kind of big questions, good versus evil, and maybe even willing to ask some of those kind of questions around, like, again, kind of meaning.
Yeah.
So it's a genre that I think is undersold in terms of, we tend to kind of think, oh, it's all about blood and gore and stuff like that.
Scares.
Especially scares, that's right. But horror, I think certainly the best horror actually is asking bigger questions that maybe mainstream movies are a little shy of. So certainly Robert Eggers is a very fine movie maker, but he is also thought-provoking.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's one of the most interesting filmmakers working right now.
And again, take seriously the notion of evil.
Yeah.
In terms of and both, to kind of human evil and then supernatural evil. Takes it seriously, and anyway, there we go, folks. There we go. Anyway,
so obviously for you, it's
tuned me out. At this point, you're kind of going, oh, I knew he was going to do that bait and switch. There he is. He's kind of like, he's softened us up with a bit of kind of like giallo and things like that. And then, wouldn't you know it, then
we'll go back to regular scheduled programming after Easter. How's that sound?
Yeah. But hopefully
it's a see it for you.
For me, definitely a see it. And I again, I know it's going to be hard work. You may be thinking, oh my goodness, what is this? It's worth. I really think it's worth the time, the 2 hours.
Yeah.
And the reflection, if you like. I think it's worth it for everyone, not just for people like me and you.
All right. Well, have a very happy Easter, everyone who's listening to this. And we will be back next week. And in the meantime, go see some movies.
Thank you for listening to You Had Me at Skip It, a Soul One Arts Inc. podcast. This podcast is produced by Mike Shepard and Austin Spinner Summer. It is a project of Soul One Arts Inc. To learn more about Soul One and all the great work that Soul One is doing in the arts community, especially in film, theater, and other performing arts, visit soul1arts.ca. You can contribute to this podcast by visiting soul1arts.ca and going to the podcast tab. You'll find all the information on You Had Me at Skip It and how you can get your questions read on air each week. Thank you again for listening.